there is a myth, and the first myth we're going to bust, which is that modern life is comfortable. Okay, modern life is comfortable. We're the luckiest people that have ever existed on the planet. We've got the internet, we've got tortillas, and we've got all these incredible things, and bacon. You can challenge that thought. Okay, you can challenge that thought. We live very busy lives. We live busy lives in the modern world because you have to work the 9 to 5, and then you have to go and feed yourself, maybe feed the children, the people around you, and then maybe you have a bit of time for watching TV or Netflix before you go to bed, and then that repeats over and over again. So in comparison, there was an anthropological study that was done a little while ago that showed that hunter-gatherer people only had to work 16 hours a day. They had to work 16 hours, which meant that they had to, for their life to be, for their needs to be met, they only had to be spending 16 hours. Whereas how many hours do you spend in your supposedly perfect modern life to be fulfilled? A lot of time, right? And on top of that, there is possibly an element of guilt as well that is present, which is that, well, because you've been living this comfortable life and you've got the best possible life, you've got the internet and HD and whatever not, then you're not really allowed to feel bad, and everything kind of has to be perfect in your life. And this is another form of guilt that we can possibly accumulate. And in that landscape, in that scenario, it doesn't feel very good to say that we're suffering from an addiction. It's like, well, you've got an addiction, but then what do you complain about? Like, just do something about it already, and it's not that big of a deal. Whereas I do want to clarify that it can be a big deal to suffer from addiction because it can lead to disastrous consequences. All right, in the worst case scenario, suicide, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that, and a lot of really disastrous, important consequences in your life. So please do not minimize the importance of this addiction, and do not listen to the naysayers that says that you're not allowed to feel like you're not 100% happy, and that maybe this lifestyle doesn't correspond to you perfectly, etc., etc. Okay, so because we live supposedly in the best perfect time doesn't mean that you have to accept that truth. And a lot of people are overwhelmed, right? So what's happening? We live in an individual society. Okay, we live in small families, or as a person, or as a couple. So if you think about when you're cooking, you have to go shopping. You have to have the inspiration for what you're going to eat this evening. Then you have to prepare the food, cook the food, and eat the food. Okay, so that's 5 or 6 steps. People who used a traditional lifestyle, or who lived in indigenous or still live in indigenous communities or societies, they have a community lifestyle where there's a group of 10 people. One person will be peeling the potatoes, one people will be gathering the herbs, another people will be making the fire, another people will be watching that the things are cooking. And so you had to do one of the batch of cooking for the entire community, but with individual lifestyle, each of us have to look after our own cooking. I'm just using cooking as an example to say, hey, we are carrying a lot on our shoulders because each of us is their own household. And that's a lot of weight to carry. And it could be made simpler. So there is that form of overwhelm that exists in our lives in the modern world, that we're all in little boxes separated from one another. Also, we all carry stress from the emotional wounds we carry. If you remember in episode 3, I talked about the trauma and emotional wounds we carry and how that's creating a lot of chaos in our lives. If you haven't revisited those past episodes in your life, you are still carrying that hurt within you, and that hurt is still limiting you and creating stress in the background. All right. When someone has gone through acute trauma, then we said that people go through PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and they've got flashes or reminiscences of this traumatic episode, or phobias that develop, things like that. But I have a theory that we're more or less suffering from a certain degree of PTSD, and it's not to minimize people who suffer from heavy PTSD or CPTSD, complex PTSD, but to an extent I'm sure we all suffer from a certain level of PTSD, because until you've looked at these wounds again, they're still there, creating the hurt that is inside you. So they must be addressed in the first time, and I'll never say this enough these wounds must be addressed because of the hurt they carry and because of the stress they create in the long run as well. And the stress they create in your life as well as a consequence of your life being not adapted to your needs. Then there's also the stress of wanting to go in that direction and ended up going in that direction. All right. The second myth I want to bust is that saying that I've heard many times, which is addicts have a hole within them, within their life, that they're trying to fill in. Wow. First of all, ouch. This is a pretty hard thing to say for people who are in a position of suffering. Also, there's that word addicts in there, which we're not a big fan of. We prefer to say people who suffer from addiction because, again, it brings that idea of that it's temporary. Having an addiction does not define your identity. And they're trying to fill in a hole in their life. Their life is too empty, and they're trying to fill in a gap in their life. Okay, so when I was working in the startup for men's sexual health, helping men with erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation and all these sorts of things, I came to realize, after having worked many, probably more than 1,000 people in this company, that the main source of psychogenic erectile dysfunction or premature ejaculation, which means that there's no issues with the plumbing, but it's just on the mental side that things are happening, or the emotional side, is due to stress. Okay, erectile dysfunction is due to stress when it's not due to anything else. Same for premature ejaculation. And the only thing we do is just to reduce the stress in those men's lives, and then they'd get a lot better very quickly because reducing stress is not that hard, especially at the beginning. So stress is an important factor in your sexuality. Second, there is something that exists and that rules our everyday life that is called ego depletion. So ego depletion, the meaning is not so much as in like someone is egotic and has a strong ego or a strong shadow and is very wounded. The ego is not the wounded self. In that case, the ego is just the self. So ego depletion says, and it's a theory that was developed by a psychologist called Baumeister somewhere in the 70s or so, which says that as you go through your day, your self-regulation is less and less good. As you go through your day, your self-regulation is less and less good. When are you the most likely to watch pornography? Is it when you get up in the morning feeling fresh and pumped for your day, or is it at the end of the day when you feel completely burnt out and you just need a soothing time? It's probably in the latter, right? When you're about to go to bed, you just have that me time with pornography. So that's because your self-regulation mechanisms are failing, which is, again, no fault of yours. We get up, we're very pumped, we're very energized, and then we start our day and we have to make, decisions and just start having discussions with people and thinking about what we have to do. And maybe there's issues we have to deal with throughout the day, etc., etc. And as we do that throughout our day, we are less and less able to make decisions because we're getting more and more tired, or more and more stressed, or more and more emotionally weakened by the thing that we go through. And it's completely normal. And eventually we crash. Or most people who don't suffer from addiction, or most people who self-regulate in the best optimal way, will just crash at some point, and their level of energy will drop and they will crash, and that's the end. They'll go to bed or they read a book and they've given enough. But what I've noticed for people with addictions is that it's a different process. They will start their day on a high and just get going, and their level of energy will drop as the day goes by, which is normal, and there's a certain threshold where they should stop, and because they're burnt out and tired. But they will continue to give more, and they'll continue to go below this threshold, and at that stage here, they're in a state of real suffering. And typically they do that to be nice with other people, or just because they're trying to prove their value, or whatever it is. And at the end of the day, when they're at that point here, and they're left on their own, they're left to their own devices, then there is an amount of pain here that is very acute. Okay, there's a lot of pain, emotional pain, social pain, physical pain, whatever it is. And so they need to soothe that pain and numb that pain. And that is when they're going to go to pornography, alcohol, whatever it is. In our case, it's pornography, to soothe that pain, find themselves again, get quality time, and be okay with themselves and then they can go to bed. All right, so people suffering from addiction will go below their threshold of energy, below their self-regulation, below what they can give for any particular reason that makes sense to them, but then they will find themselves with this pain that they had to let go of. So the origin of addiction in that case is a soothing. It is a soothing of an overwhelmed, they're emotionally overwhelmed, they're cognitively overwhelmed, they're socially overwhelmed at the end of the day, and so they need to soothe either that pain there or just soothing all the stuff that's happened during the day that's been so intense. And so that inner child inside them is like, wow, I've been giving so much of myself today, and I've been all about taking care of other people and not being selfish, and now is the time for me, and now is the time to be not necessarily selfish but self-centered, and so I'm going to indulge in pleasure, and that's going to be pornography. That's a very, very powerful mechanism that's at stake that not many people know about or take into account. All right, mythbuster number 3. There is nothing you can do about compulsion. When you have that edge, that feeling, that inclination, that desire, that prospect of watching pornography, you kind of know it's going to happen. All right, because you've had that feeling before, you know where it ends. So I want to introduce the concept of reaction versus response, and this comes from somewhere in psychology, I forgot where, but there is this incredibly beautiful quote by Rumi, who's my favorite sage, philosopher, poet, thinker, you name it, and he says, between the rightness and the wrongness of things, there is a space. I will meet you there. So the reason why I'm saying this is because you don't necessarily need to engage into A or B when something happens. Typically, when we're reacting to things, a certain event happens, and we switch into a reaction automatically, and we go to either response A or response B, maybe response C, but we tend to flick automatically into these. When you're responding to something, there's a situation that happens, and then this information gets into you and gets treated before the reaction. That's a healthy way of doing things. And it's like, oh, okay, this is happening. I'm feeling this and that with respect to that. There can be those consequences happening to that situation. So strategically, emotionally, I am inclined to making that decision, and I'm making the decision C, for example. That is the best way of doing things, all right? You don't have to respond immediately to something. You don't have to react to something on the spot. You can take the time and respond. And the more you train yourself to have this buffer time, the more you train yourself to have this time where you can absorb what's happening and then respond, the more you'll be able to lead your life in a strategic way, which we'll talk a lot about that in the 6th pillar. So when you feel that, and just a note that the agency within you that is making this decision, that is making this response, whether that the reaction, which is a typical inner child response, inner child reaction, the response is typically held by your inner adult. If you remember the episode 3, by your inner Dalai Lama, your inner spiritual self is going to be able to see things for what they are, make a strategic decision, and move on from that. All right, so whenever you feel that trigger, whenever you feel that impulse to watch pornography, this compulsion feels pretty hopeless. There is something you can do when you feel that compulsion, and I'm not going to ask you to go and play soccer or to play video games or to do something to distract the compulsion. While it's something that you can do, it's only something you do at the very end of your treatment on Unhooked, but there's something you can do to learn from that. And that is to sit with the feeling, okay? Sitting with the feeling. Next time you're feeling a compulsion to watch pornography, I'm going to ask you that. I'm not going to ask you to not watch pornography. That is fine. You're going to watch pornography. But I'm asking you to sit with the feeling. And I'm going to ask you to sit for 5 minutes and just to wait. Give yourself 5 minutes before watching pornography and to observe how you feel. The reason why you want to watch pornography is because there is a feeling inside you, or a thought inside you, or an emotion inside you. And that is driving you to want to soothe that horribly painful emotion, thought, physical sensation, whatever it is. So take 5 minutes, 300 seconds, and just, you can also journal, you can write down what you're feeling before you watch pornography. And you'll be able to observe, oh, I'm actually observing pornography because there is this thought that, something today went wrong, and I've got this thought that I'm worthless. I'm watching pornography because emotionally I feel rejected and left alone. I'm watching pornography because I've got this pressure in my chest. I certainly had that a lot in my days of addiction, where it would just express itself as a pressure in my lungs and a pressure in my ribs. And all I wanted was just to get rid of that sensation, and so I would watch pornography for that. So sometimes it speaks in ways that we can understand. Sometimes pain in the chest is less obvious, but still it's always an emotional mechanism, a cognitive mechanism behind that. So there is something you can do in the compulsion, is to take the middle way, to wait between the rightness and the wrongness of things, to sit with the feeling and to observe ourselves in that. And that is a key to understanding yourself in your compulsion. Okay, so we understand that stress is a big factor in creating addiction. Fine. We've seen a few aspects of the stress and how it can manifest. Okay, now how do we address that in the first place? How do we reduce stress? There's two ways to address stress. The first way is to actually reduce the stress in your life. Okay, we mentioned that, ego depletion, there's so many things happening in your day that it's hard to take everything into account and to address everything properly. So how can you rearrange your life? Here you're going to work on your environment, on your life environment, on your life systems. How can you work on your life that there's less things to do, or that you're feeling less stressed? Okay, stress is scarcity. You're feeling stressed because there's a shortage of resources in your life. Could be food. There's no food in the fridge. Could be money. There's not enough money in your bank account. Could be fun people to be around. Okay, all the people around you are a little bit gray and sad, and actually it's dragging you down. There's a scarcity of something in your life that is creating stress. How can you address that and really fix that in your life? And a very common one is also for people to be short of time, right? And to be time poor. So like Tim Ferriss said, there's very little time with very little people with time issues. As people who suffer from time issues are the people who suffer from priority issues. You'll have difficulties to cram everything in one day if you don't prioritize what is the most important to you. And if still there's too much, can you delegate? And if still there's too much, can you automatize the systems so that you've got a computer doing it instead of you, or a washing machine, or whatever that is? Anything to improve your life systems is going to help and reduce that stress. Okay, so rearranging your life so it's in the best possible way, so your systems are working well, so you finally have time for yourself. Okay, within your day, there should be a gap of 10 minutes between everything you do. Okay, between the time when you come out of a meeting and you're going to have lunch. Hey, it would be nice to have 10 minutes. Maybe you're walking to lunch where you just do nothing, right? And then when you come back from work, back into home, it would be nice to have 15 minutes where you can let go of all that work energy and just relax and get into home feeling relaxed, maybe ready to welcome your children, and to reconnect to that family energy more so than that work energy. So for me, that's a golden rule, to have a 15-minute buffer between everything I do, between meetings, between calls, between work sessions, whatever it is. It really helps. Another way to reduce the stress is that, at some stage you will have fixed your life in the best possible way, and unless you've got the next promotion or something like that happens at work, or your children get out of the house because they're 16 or 18, then there's not much you're going to be able to do. So then it's about yourself and how you handle stress yourself. And so the best way to be able to cope with stress, as I said, is to create this 15-minute buffers has really helped, but also is to start engaging in mindfulness. So mindfulness is a bit of a buzzword as we speak, as is meditation. I will say that. I had a lot of skepticism and mental barriers to meditating for the first 3 years that I heard about meditation. And after that, meditation has been the second best improvement in my life. the second best improvement in my life, in everything that I've tried in personal development and otherwise, because it has allowed me to gain emotional stability, and it's allowed me to respond rather than react, and it's allowed me to find a space within me to be okay with who I was. So meditation is key. We have several meditations available on Unhooked for today, be it on Unhooked, or you can also go on YouTube and Google, meditation. You can put the timer there. You can say 10-minute meditation, 5-minute meditation. I will say start very small and build it up later. But if you can find the time to do a 5-minute meditation every day for 7 days, you will be incredibly much more calm and incredibly much more available and connected to yourself than if you didn't. Just this 5 minutes in a day make a whole difference. All right, and again, meditation and mindfulness is not a religious thing. You don't have to be Tibetan or Nepali or Hindu to engage in those. It's just about creating the space within you. It's very much a psychological tool more so than a spiritual tool. It can be spiritual if you want to, but in the first place, it's a psychological tool to make space within yourself. So see if you can get into that meditation, and how does that feel to be creating space within you and space in your life for yourself. And I said it's the second best thing, so you're wondering what is the first best thing? Well, the first best thing is trauma reprocessing. I started with meditation, and after meditation I was more calm, I had more control over my life, but there are still things that were going sideways. And when I engaged in trauma reprocessing, like I discussed in episode 3, this is where everything came into alignment, and I started feeling very, very happy and fulfilled. All right, so we covered a lot today. What did we cover? Mythbuster number 1. We live in the most comfortable time of humanity. It is not true. People have hectic lives in modern life. It's okay to feel bad. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be suffering from addiction. There's nothing to be ashamed about. You don't need to feel guilt about it. Myth number 2 that we've busted. Addicts have a hole they're trying to fill in their life. No. People who suffer from addiction have too much going on. Their nervous system is overwhelmed emotionally, socially, cognitively, and so they're using the compulsive behavior to take the edge off this overwhelm by creating some me time of pleasure, which is what happens with pornography. Myth number 3, there's nothing you can do to stop compulsion. Well, you can stop compulsion by sitting with the feeling and observing yourself in that moment of pain that you're feeling. And if you think inside yourself, well, it's not really pain, I'm going to challenge you and say, well, why do you then go and do the thing you do if it's not about soothing the pain? And it could be something else, and for 90% of you it will probably be soothing the pain. And finally, how do we reduce stress? Reorder the systems in your life so you have more time, maybe more money, maybe more people around you, whatever it is that you need, and the scarcity is reflecting. And finally, engaging in meditation to reconnect to yourself, understand that you're okay the way you are, and create more space for yourself in your life. In the next video, we'll be talking about the 5th and one before last pillar in our Mythbuster course, and that is living a fulfilled sex life. I'll see you there.